One of the trickiest parts of creating a new character for a TTRPG like D&D or Pathfinder is writing your character's backstory. And I think it's trickier than many players realize, particularly if they haven't been a dungeon master before themselves. If you're a new player, creating a backstory is really intimidating because you really lack the context for what a backstory even looks like. And I think some experienced players often end up writing very epic and detailed backstories that they're very proud of, but that sometimes present the dungeon master with a lot of problems. If they're not done correctly, those detailed backstories can lead a campaign off on a tangent that spotlights one character over all the others, or that ends up being entirely ignored, which isn't satisfying for anyone. The key thing to keep in mind when you're crafting your character's backstory is that ultimately, the point of this game we play is for everyone at the table to tell one grand story together, not 4 or 5 individual stories. So, before you go off on your own to write the next great American backstory, let me give you some tips as a player for writing up a backstory that will be easy for your DM to incorporate into the campaign, that will tie you into the main story and the other characters, and that will let you and your friends tell a compelling and memorable story together. So let's get to it. This video is brought to you by the Fablemaker's animated tarot deck and guidebook from Hit Point Press, a beautiful way to add some magic to your 5e games. The first step of writing your backstory is getting the information you need from your dungeon master. Not every dungeon master is going to know exactly what you need, so you may have to ask. First, if you're playing a pre-written Pathfinder adventure, make sure you get a hold of the free player's guide for that AP from Paizo's website, as that often has everything you'll need. D&D doesn't put out guides like that, so if you're playing a game without a player's guide, here are some things to ask for. Ask your GM if there's going to be a main setting for the campaign, or at the very least a starting location that may be revisited during the story. And then ask if there are local NPCs that are recurring characters or contacts in the story, like local authorities, innkeepers, shop owners, nobles, etc. If you can root yourself near where the adventure occurs, or at least where it starts, it's going to be a lot easier for the DM to include your backstory and your important characters in the main story. If the adventure takes place in Baldur's Gate and all your friends and family live in Icewind Dale, they're probably not going to enter into the story no matter what happens. If your DM gives you a location but doesn't really have any important NPCs they can share, I recommend asking your GM for a session 0 or even a session -1, where you can help embellish and build that starting locale together, whether it be a small village, a district of a larger city, a neighborhood, a sailing ship, whatever. See if the game master can give you a map and any important locations or any existing NPCs at all. Then bring the group together and create that location as a group. Point to a building on the map and decide, this is a general store. It's run by an elderly dwarven couple with 12 kids who are always running around the place. The father loves to have neighborhood parties where he brews up his hometown ale to share with everyone. His name is Grogburn. This building here is a temple to Joaquin, the goddess of commerce, and it doubles as a local merchants guild headquarters that organizes trade deals and caravan routes and authorizes new businesses, etc., etc. But maybe it's run by a half-elf from the big city named Tilly, who is suspected of skimming money off the top for her own profit. As you build that town or whatever together, you can each decide your place in that town, your role and your ties to the community, and hopefully to each other. Maybe one player is starting as a crafter under the tutelage of Grogburn, who hopes to open a new blacksmithing business, but Tilly is making unreasonable demands of you, and you don't know why. Maybe another character is an old cleric of Joaquin who was forced out of the temple by Tilly. And as you build up your community here, stories start to just organically materialize. And before you even start session 1, you each have a really good sense of who you are, how you know each other, where you live, and what you care about. You can even pick out houses on the map where you live. And when the group builds the setting together, it makes it your own. It makes it that much more important to you if something happens to it. Now, this is a great opportunity to build connections between the characters. This may develop organically as you build your hometown or setting together, but another option I often use is the fiasco method. You can do this with a random die roll if you want to. Have the Game Master come up with around 10 ways that characters might be connected to each other in this particular campaign. Maybe they're family members, close friends, work colleagues, maybe they share a similar passion, maybe one saved the other during a traumatic experience in the past, maybe one owes another one a large debt of some kind. You can even brainstorm and build this table together as a group, and just number the list to make it a rolling table. Each character is going to have some sort of relationship with the person sitting directly to their left and to their right. For each connection, roll the die and see what comes up. Then those people, the two people, brainstorm on the details of that connection. I have always liked the setup of each player having a pre-existing relationship with exactly 2 other characters. It is a great jumping off point for a story without being overwhelming. Next, ask your Game Master if there are certain races, ancestries, or classes that are particularly well suited to this adventure that they're running. If there's a heavy religious theme to the story, having a paladin or a cleric might be really great. If there's a strong nature component, you may want to consider a ranger or a druid. If there's a conflict between humans and orcs, making a half-orc character could be very interesting. And there are some factions that play a large part in the story too. Could be the Harpers, or the Zentarum, or the Bloodlords, or the Knights of Lastwall, the Red Wizards of Thay. If you can get that information, you can either tie your character into the faction by having, for example, your family members be members of that faction, or you can set yourself against that faction by having them be responsible for something bad that happened in your life. It'll give you context and possible motivations for when that faction enters the story. Before you just decide willy-nilly what kind of character you want to play, see if you can pry some information out of your Game Master to make a character that, 1, you would enjoy playing, which is important, and 2, that will complement the story that they want to tell. Next, ask your Game Master if there are any overarching themes to the story that they're telling, themes that they're willing to talk about. For example, themes of greed ruining relationships, or hubris leading to catastrophe, or relationships with fathers, or power struggles, or corruption, things like that. Then when you're thinking about what you want your personal story arc to be, try to echo those themes. Every PC should have a weakness or a flaw, especially in the beginning of a story. And if your flaw echoes the flaw of the antagonist of the story, for example, it can make for some really compelling storytelling. Your character may end up being consumed by that flaw when presented with an opportunity to get what they've always lusted for. Or perhaps the experience of the adventure with their companions will help your character overcome their flaw and make the right decision in that critical moment that leads to their redemption and the triumph of good. Your character may have started in the same place as the villain, but because you set aside your prejudices and formed loyal friendships with the people who supported you, you had a different outcome than the bad guy. And that juxtaposition can often be really interesting. The last thing I would ask the Game Master before sitting down to work on my personal backstory is if there's any inciting incident that your GM is willing to talk about that will make these characters want to begin adventuring. And they can be vague about this if they want to. Maybe something is threatening your home. Maybe a cataclysm is going to happen. Maybe they'll be approached with an opportunity too good to ignore. But if you can find out what kind of event it is, then you can tailor that into your story. For example, if something catastrophic is going to happen, like a dragon attack on the town, or a natural disaster, or a frost giant raid, something like that, you're probably going to want your character to be at a place in their life where they're happy and content with everything just starts to fall apart. And they may begin questing to reclaim what they lost, or to seek vengeance, or just to get a fresh start after losing everything. If the start of the campaign is something relatively positive, like the opportunity to help the good king, or to seek out treasure, or to just explore the world beyond the mountains, then you may want to write a story such that your character has reached a plateau and is looking for opportunities to do something new. Maybe they're unhappy with their life in some way, and this opportunity marks a chance to find what they've been missing. So find out what kind of event kicks off the story and then decide where your character is in their life at that time that would make them most willing to go on the adventure. Now, when you do sit down to write your story, there are things you're going to want to include and things to keep in mind. First, make sure your character has room for growth. They should be flawed, unfulfilled, not content with what they have. They should have lessons to learn and growth that needs to happen for them to be happy. They may have misplaced motivations for wealth, for attention, for power. That's another opportunity to bring in the themes of the adventure. Now, this can be a struggle for new players especially. The idea of playing a flawed character may not seem super appealing. And I'm probably going to have to make a full video on this later on, but trust me for now, Those flaws serve two purposes. It gives you room for character growth, and that story will resonate with you a lot longer than if you were just gonna play a Mary Sue. And two, a lot of the good fun of role-playing games comes from role-playing flaws, whether it's just a low intelligence like Grog, or a fear of snakes like Indiana Jones, or an inability to understand figurative language like Drax. There's a lot of room for fun and great storytelling. But they also should have a well of strength to pull from, something that serves as a foundation for that growth and that could make them exemplary despite those flaws. There could be a wealth of arcane knowledge, or it could be a charismatic personality and charm, or an athletic ability, or a strong moral code, or just a skilled trade. When the chips are down, what does your character bring to the party? There's also a small thing to consider that can make a world of difference when it comes to breathing life into your character. Give them some quirks. A fear of spiders, some of those flaws, an addiction to snacking on sunflower seeds, some superstitions from their childhood that they still carry with them, a strong desire to collect interesting clockwork devices, or an addiction to whittling and woodworking. Maybe they always find something to complain about, or they're just generally easy to push around by stronger personalities. Those little kind of personality quirks shouldn't be overwhelming or annoying to the group especially, but they should make these characters feel a little bit more like real people. But I think the most important thing you want to include in your backstory are adventure hooks for your dungeon master. There are two primary ways to do this. You can create mysteries for your character to solve, or you can have characters in your story who end up being important catalysts for the overall story. So, creating mysteries is the easiest way. Often this involves something bad that happened to your character in the past that you don't fully understand. A family member went missing under mysterious circumstances. Someone stole an important family heirloom. You carry a family curse and you don't know why. It could also be a good thing. A mysterious mentor taught your character their vital skill, like lockpicking or casting or playing the lute, whatever it is. But then they vanished one day. The GM will take those hooks, flesh out the details, and hopefully in your travels you'll discover the answers. The tricky part of this is making the mystery something core enough to the character that the resolution of it could change the character on a fundamental level. If you're going to go the mystery plot hook route, this mystery needs to be an obsession for your character. It has colored everything that has happened since. Maybe it's poisoned your relationships with your family, or it was a betrayal of trust so severe that it made forming new relationships nearly impossible. And if you can tie this mystery, whatever it is, closely to the overall themes of the adventure like we talked about before, that'll make it resonate even more. If it's like, oh, I lost my favorite toy as a child. I think someone stole it, but I don't know who, but it's not really a big deal, then the resolution of that story isn't gonna be very interesting either. The other way of making plot hooks is a little bit trickier. It involves having characters in your backstory that can be merged with important NPCs in the adventure that you don't know about. When you're writing your backstory, it's great to have some very well-defined characters that are all your own. Your mother, your kid, your best friend. But if you can leave some of them somewhat vague, it gives your game master the opportunity to merge them with pre-existing NPCs in the adventure. Say one of the early antagonists in the adventure is a corrupt noble who's been trying to make a pact with the devil in order to save their kid from a terminal disease. In your backstory, you might reference a person in the town who has a lot of social power and who owns your parents' business, or a person who adopted you from an orphanage when you were a kid. Those characters are similar enough that they can be merged into one. It's hard because you don't know what kind of characters are in the adventure, but if you can lay those seeds by being somewhat vague in your descriptions, then it opens a possibility that the person who is important to your backstory is also one of the primary drivers of the overall story, which means that you've accomplished that goal of having one grand story at the table rather than 4 or 5 separate ones. A good game master is very likely going to take your backstory and give you some feedback and suggestions. They may recommend changing a few details in your story, and they won't tell you why that they're making those suggestions. Often it's because you are very close to tying your character into something important, and if you make those little alterations, you'll have it. So do your best to take that feedback and use it. Now, I'm going to make some videos later on for game masters on how to take those story hooks and big characters that you as a player give them and use them to their fullest effect, so be sure you're subscribed to check those out. This video here was made possible by Hit Point Press and their Fablemaker's animated tarot deck and guidebook. Not only is this a full tarot deck with instructions on how to do readings with it, it's also a fantastic tool to aid your creativity in 5e games. The Fablemaker's guidebook teaches you how to use the cards you draw to help build out your characters, their traits, their backstory, and more. There's also instructions on enhancing existing subclasses with your cards. And the guidebook just won gold in the 2023 Independent Publishers Book Awards. We have a full video about the cards and guidebook up there in the corner of your screen if you want to learn more, and help support our work at the Gallant Goblin here by checking them out at the links down below. That is the Fablemaker's Animated Tarot and Guidebook by Hit Point Press. Hopefully this video gave you a primer on how to write a backstory that will enhance the game for everyone at your table. If you have any suggestions or questions, please leave them for me down below. Every game is different, and every table has their own way of storytelling, but those are techniques that have worked for me. If you have questions or video requests, let me know. If you want to adopt a kobold of your very own, you can pick one up over at heroplus.com. You can follow us on social media on like a dozen different websites, but here are a couple. And I really need to just train one of our cats to take over our social media because it's becoming really overwhelming. But until then, stay safe, have fun, love each other, and I will see you next time at the Gallant Goblin.